Hey folks, Nathan here from Star Wars Beyond the Films and Cloud City Casino, a Star Wars gaming podcast, both of which can be found at StarWarsReport.com. Bring you a look at another Star Wars Fantasy Flight Games game this time around. This is a brand new one here in June of 2019. This is Star Wars Outer Rim, and yes, we're going to be looking at this on a playmat, but it is the Starfield playmat from X-Wing. Why? Because yeah, there is a playmat for Outer Rim, but for some ridiculous reason they didn't have it ready at the time of the game's release. It's not showing up on the FantasyFlightGames.com site as anywhere within the production process, and only recently got re-added to the site after the page disappeared. So here's hoping we actually do still get that game mat. They said it's coming, but it certainly didn't come with the game. And given that the game is meant to be supposedly a standalone, then again, so is Rebellion, and it got one expansion, we have to wonder, what's the deal with the timing on the game mat? But anyway, let's take a look here at Outer Rim. This is, as it says, a game of bounty hunters, mercenaries, and smugglers for 1 to 4 players. So right out the gate, we know something very important about this for many game players these days, especially those who roam Kickstarter, as I often do. This is not a Kickstarter game, and that is the fact that this does have a solo mode built in. You don't need an app for it. It is part of the game itself. All the components you need are in the box. It's also something that, to me, is a little more appealing than something like Rebellion. Rebellion tends to be a game that's very much about sort of conquering the galaxy. It's that big macro level type of gameplay, which is great if you like that sort of thing. But for me, I always tend to like games that are a little more individualized, a little more about the character, about their journey. That's why I like stuff like Gloom of Kilforth, for instance, or Nemesis. What are your goals as an individual? How are you playing against other players as individuals, not as armies, not as factions? So in that case, Outer Rim definitely fit the bill for me. The back of the box lays it all out for us here. It lets us know what our game contents will be, but we'll be taking a look at those ourselves, and it gives us a general concept for the game. It says, everything you've heard about me is true. Lando Calrissian. In Star Wars Outer Rim, you and your friends take on the roles of bounty hunters, smugglers, and mercenaries, and set out to make your mark on the galaxy. You'll travel the Outer Rim in your personal ship, hire legendary Star Wars characters to join your crew, and try to become the most famous or infamous outlaw in the galaxy. Will you make a name for yourself by hunting bounties for the Hutts, stealing for the crime syndicates, or smuggling goods past Imperial patrols? All this and more is possible as you adventure through the outskirts of the known galaxy. Set your coordinates, gather your crew, and make the jump to hyperspace with Star Wars Outer Rim. Now, as is typical with most Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars games these days, we have 2 different rule books here, essentially. The Learn to Play guide gives you the basics of how to play and deals with most of the situations that you'll encounter, but it doesn't do a huge deep dive into the nuances of them that could come up in more complex gameplay or in just one-off situations. For that, you'll need the rule reference here, so we have one of those as well, just like you would expect from most, though not all, most of these Star Wars games from Fantasy Flight these days. Now, somewhat similar to Imperial Assault, but not nearly to that level of complexity, we are going to build our game board with pieces that interconnect here. We have a pair of end caps. The end caps each have a point here for us to put patrol tokens for a particular faction. So this particular end cap here has the Rebel Alliance and has the crime syndicates there. All the crime syndicates in this game are sort of thought of as one thing except for the Hutts, because of the idea that if you have a bad reputation with one, if you're deemed untrustworthy with one, if you are scheming with them, if you're known as trustworthy on the opposite end, it's something that most of the syndicates would know because it's sort of that shared underworld here. So you have that end cap. We also have an end cap here representing the Imperials and the Hutts as far as where to put certain tokens, as we'll see later. Then we have 6 different map tiles that are also going to fit together. In theory, you're supposed to start your game, play most games with basically one specific layout that we'll see when I put them together here in a moment. But in order to change things up, you can mix and match the order of these. It's designed for a balanced game in the predetermined order of map tiles. But you can mix it up. They just note, even in the Learn to Play book, that it's not as balanced of a game. So we have one of these that has Ryloth and Naboo on it. We have one with Tatooine and Nal Hutta, and I guess I should note here that factions have symbols on some of these planets, which basically means that you're more likely to do things there that could give you benefits if you have a positive reputation with that faction, or you might be able to gain reputation with that faction on that particular world, or maybe dangerous to you if you have a bad reputation with that faction. So we have the Rebels on Ryloth, the Empire on Naboo. We have the Hutts on Tatooine, of course, the Hutts also on Nal Hutta. We have Kessel, where the crime syndicates are there. We have the Maelstrom as a separate space. All of these are navigation or nav points that you move between, including the planets, although they're not considered nav points, but you move between planets as well. The Maelstrom is a special place in that when a player reaches that point, they have to stop dead in their tracks in the middle of their movement, whereas only certain other types of vehicles, like, say, a patrol ship, is able to pass through with no problem. The same is the case for the AI player if you're playing a one-player game. Then we have another one with Mon Calamari, not Mon Cala, so not naming it the way the Clone Wars tended to, not Dak, not going back, kind of deep into Legends, but Mon Calamari, which it was known as in Legends for a long time, and I guess still sometimes in canon. Then we have Lothal, Rebels present on Mon Calamari, Imperials on Lothal. We have the Ring of Kafrene from Rogue One. We have Takodana. Then we have Cantonica and Ord Mantell, and the backs are just blank on all of these. So we put these together, and we have our map, which goes from one end cap to Cantonica, Ord Mantell, Lothal, Mon Calamari, Kessel through the Maelstrom, Tatooine and Nal Hutta, Ryloth, Naboo, Ring of Kafrene, Takodana, and then the other end cap. It is played along a sort of U-shaped map here, a rim, if you will. Now, each of your players, and it can be up to 4, will have a player board. And give them credit here, they didn't make them all look the same. They went with different color schemes for each, which is kind of nice. Each one of these has a few different features to it, okay? You've got a place here to the side, like a little indentation. That's what you're going to put your ship card, we're going to see here in a moment, up against. It has a scale of 0 to 12. This is how you're going to keep track of your fame. Notice the little star thing there underneath 10. In a typical game, reaching a fame of 10 is how you win. You can extend the game to make it go to 12 if you all agree beforehand. You could go to 8 to make it go faster, and so on and so on. Okay? You are going to have cards that represent gear. There are places to put those cards, just sort of slipping them underneath so only a certain part is showing. Same thing with jobs or bounties, 2 places for them. You have a little area here where you will put the card that represents the character you are playing as, essentially the ship's pilot. And you'll be using little markers to keep track of your reputation with the 4 different factions, the Hutts, Syndicate, Imperials, or Rebels, which will go here and slide up and down. And you notice here, these are all cutouts for these here and this here, okay, which is pretty nice. So kudos on the character boards. You'll have 4 of these little white kind of plain looking fame markers, but they're designed to fit their pegs into those holes. So say we've got a fame of 0 to start with, right there into the hole. So it's not, as some have suggested just looking at the images, it's not that the little fame marker just sits on there and could easily be knocked one way or the other. It actually does plug into the hole, so it's relatively stationary. Now there's a total of 8 characters you could play as here. Each of their cards is double-sided. We have Jyn Erso, Lando Calrissian, Han Solo, Boba Fett, Bossk, IG-88, Ketsu Onyo, and Dr. Aphra, right? Chelilona Aphra, they just call her Doctor. Now, each character's card has their name, has their ground combat value, has their health. I would note here that in this game, it's kind of like Gloom of Kilforth in the sense that when you get defeated, you're basically just out for a turn, and when you come back on the next turn, there's a part of the process of the turn, the preparation or the planning step, as it's called in this game, where you basically are able to fully heal and get rid of all your damage and all the damage off of your ship so you can get back into the game. So it costs you some, you lose some credits, and you lose some of your secrets that you may have earned that could be used throughout the game. But beyond that, it's not like there's a permadeath whenever you die for the first time. You just keep playing, you just suffer a setback. Now, some of these cards have abilities or different things specific to them. Some of them are fairly straightforward. It's just like a bonus, but others are like actions that you can use as an action, things you can use as an encounter, and so on. But they all have a personal goal, right? Once you meet that personal goal, you flip the card, and now you have some type of extra ability that you didn't have before. They also have skills listed at the bottom. Essentially, you're going to roll dice in this game. It comes with 6, and they are essentially just the attack dice from X-Wing done in different colors with hit, critical hit, or crit, and focus icons on them. And if you are someone who is unskilled, which means that you're doing a test in something where you don't have any of these skills on your pilot card or crew cards anywhere, unskilled, you're required to score a crit, which is only showing up once on each of these 8-sided die. If you score a crit, you succeed. Otherwise, you don't. Right? So you can still do a skill test, even if it's something you are unskilled in, so to speak. Okay? If you're skilled, then you can roll a crit or a hit, and you're going to be fine. You're going to pass the test. If you're highly skilled, you have that same skill showing up more than once, then now not only will a crit or a hit succeed for you, you will also succeed on a focus symbol. So essentially, you're constantly increasing your odds as you have more of a skill. Regardless of the number of times you have that skill show up, though, you're only ever rolling 2 of those dice for a skill check. So you're essentially increasing your odds, but not by the number of dice that you actually roll. Just what symbols on those dice can count as successes. So you're going to take your pilot. I'm partial to Aphra, just because of the character herself, because she's freaking crazy. Indiana Jones if he was nuts. And there we go. Okay, so that's where they'd fit on your little character board there. Each character will also start with a ship, and you get to choose which of these ships you start with. You can either choose a G-1A starfighter, right? So kind of like the Mist Hunter there. Or you can choose the G-9 Rigger, like the Twilight. And it's just one card here that has one on either side. Okay. Each of these has a hyperspace value, which tells you how far you can travel in one turn. And then it's got a space combat value, a space, essentially a attack value here, and then a hull value. So these two sort of act like the attack and health, just like you have the ground attack and the health on your character card. These are what you would use in space combat rather than ground combat. And then you'll use that hyperspace value to tell you how many nav points worth of travel you can do following these paths in any one movement during your turn. The ships also have spaces for cargo, for mods, for crew, all of which are acquired throughout the game, and have a credit value up in the corner, in this case 0, that you can use to essentially barter, as they call it, and trade in towards a new ship. Because you're not just going to use the Rigger or the G-1A throughout the game. You could acquire others. The other ships are pretty cool because they have more stuff, in this case cargo, cargo or mod, crew, so more spots to put stuff. Different values here, different values here. And these ships will start out as just a type, a modified YT-1300 light freighter here instead of Millennium Falcon. But there's a ship goal. Complete that ship goal, and just like the personal goal for your character, you can flip it over. Now you have special modifications. Now you have some type of special ability over here, and the ship is named. You sort of earned a reputation for the ship just as you can earn a reputation for yourself. So you've already seen the YT-1300 / Millennium Falcon. The other options include the Valorous, which is actually from Clone Wars. The Moldy Crow, of course, from the Jedi Knight games, starring Kyle Katarn, the guy who was featured in my Star Wars Tales story oh so long ago. Slave One, the Houndstooth, the IG-2000, the Archangel, yes, they put Aphra's ship in the game, and the Shadowcaster. So basically, if you figure that Han and Lando sort of share the Falcon thematically, then you've got the Valorous to sort of make up some space along with the Moldy Crow to make up some space because Jyn Erso also didn't have a ship necessarily specific to her within Rogue One. So you'll take your ship, we're going to use the Archangel because it is Aphra after all, and put it in its initial state right there. So as you can see, they sort of connect together, and this is how you're keeping track. There's just some more tokens to use in doing so, and other cards that will come into play. Since you have 4 players, 4 character boards, you also have 4 sets of these little reputation markers. Yellow for Syndicate, green for Hutts, red for Rebels, and blue for Imperials. And they essentially just fit in here. Okay, a little bit of space there because you need to slide them around a lot as you play. They'll start in the center, and then as you wind up gaining or losing reputation with a faction, you'll slide them up or down. The only positions they can be in are up, down, or centered. If it's up, you have a positive reputation with them. They think you're trustworthy. That in some cases will give you benefits. It'll allow you to not have to stop and fight patrols for that particular faction. If it's in the center, they really don't know you very well, right? Not positive or negative, just kind of there. If it's a negative reputation, it has the downside of, in some cases, being penalized, including having to constantly go up against the patrols from that particular faction. Now, speaking of patrols, these are ships loyal to one of the factions that are also traveling around. Generally speaking, when someone purchases a card through the market, another card will be revealed, as we'll see, that has information about which patrol moves and how many spaces near whoever that player is that's active at the time. And there's only one patrol from each faction that is out there patrolling at any one time, with the other ones remaining essentially sitting on those little spots on the end caps that I mentioned before when I showed you those symbols. They go in increasing order of difficulty to fight if you run into them as a patrol. They have the symbol of the faction and then a pip on the bottom, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, so you know what order to place them in when you are stacking them up to be able to pull them out as they get increasingly more difficult. So for the Empire, we essentially have a Lambda-class shuttle there. Each one of these is going to tell you the faction, it's going to tell you its space combat value, and it's going to show you the reward, whatever it may be, from defeating it. So to look at these real quick, okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, interestingly, what you'll find when you get to the 4th one is notice that its value for space combat has a little dash and there's no reward. The level 4 patrol, if you ever wind up encountering these guys because you've already taken out the earlier patrols, you got hell to pay because they basically have what amounts to sort of an infinite power rating. They automatically destroy your ship, or at least slam you enough that your hull value goes to 0, so you're incapacitated and have to heal to begin to the next turn, lose some stuff, etc., to get back into play, as I mentioned before. That's also why there's no reward. You can't beat them. Our rebels, they are very tiny. Syndicate, and the Hutts. Now you might say, well, okay, you just showed us, what represents these patrols moving around the board, so these little coin-shaped suckers are going to be moving around the board, but how are you moving around? Well, you may have guessed from the fact that the patrols are just tokens, not miniatures, that this is, in fact, a miniature-free game. There's almost no games, aside from card games from Fantasy Flight for Star Wars, that actually don't use minis in some form. This game does not. Instead, each character is represented, very Gloom of Kilforth-esque, just my point of reference there, by a character standee. So we have one of those for each. We've already seen the characters, no need to look at each one. You've got your standee here. Slip on a nice little base, and then you'll march it around to represent where that character and their ship is. Interestingly, I am kind of impressed by the fact that it seems like they've learned their lesson a little bit from what we saw with Rebellion in the way these are set up, because they're not gouging lines into your tokens, into your standees, every single time you put them on and take them off. So thanks to them for that. A little more player friendly. So maybe Afra there's on Kessel, so she's there. Or maybe she's a couple nav points away, or whatever. You're just represented by wherever your character standee happens to be. And you don't all start at the same place. At the beginning of the game, during the setup, there's some specific setup rules at the bottom of the character card that's going to sometimes tell you about, you already have some reputation in one direction or another with a particular faction, but will also have you draw a particular databank card, as we're going to see, and those databank cards typically have jobs or things like that to do, and they will note a place, and you'll start on that place. So you're not all starting in the same location necessarily. You might, but not necessarily, and typically in more than a two-player game, at least someone will be in a different location. Speaking of characters at locations, each of these planets has a couple of spots next to it for characters you may encounter on those planets. In this game, they refer to them as contacts, and each space, can't really see it from that angle, has a particular number of pips and a color underneath it, either green, yellow, or gray. And that is how you determine which of your individual contacts goes in which space, all represented, you guessed it, by tokens. For gray tokens, we have Lobot, Dr. Evazan, Ponda Baba, W1LE, Garandan, and Black Sun Agent. Okay, so a total of 6. For green, we have Bib Fortuna, Bo Shek, Leia Organa, Greedo, Forlom, an IGRM droid, and Hondo Onaka. Okay, so a total of 7. And then 9 that are yellow. Zeton Moj, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Hera Syndulla, Maz Kanata, K2SO, Dengar, Saw Gerrera, and Chewbacca. Okay, 22, because we have 11 locations, and then you have 2 for each location. And because you're going to be doing things like hunting bounties or trying to get in touch with a particular contact where the only clue you may have is what color they are and how many pips they have, knowing which one is which when it's face down can help. So like Zeton Moj is a 3-pip yellow guy, so he could theoretically be up there, but he could also be down here, or here, or here, and so on and so on. But it helps you narrow down where they might be, kind of like random clues you might discover in searching for a particular individual. When you encounter them, they then flip up, and they may be discarded, or you may do something immediately with them. It just depends on the circumstance. But each one is going to give you a faction symbol or a droid symbol, as the case may be. Is going to give you their name and portrait. Then there's a number on here which refers to a databank card, which tells you what to do next. Very much like the databank card I already mentioned as part of the setup process on the character card. We'll get to those when we look at actual cards here momentarily. First, let's get through the rest of the non-card components. You're going to do damage. You'll need a way to mark it. You have 40 damage tokens. There are none that are of different value. They're all simply a value of 1, unlike most of the FFG Star Wars games. You have a proof of purchase. Yeah, who cares? You have 12 so-called goal tokens. You'll use these to keep track of the goals like your ship goal or your personal goal, because usually you have to do things multiple times, and this lets you know how many times you've done it. You'll also use these to create the points that the AI player travels to carry out their missions if you're playing the single-player version of the game. You're also going to earn credits, of course, right? You're a smuggler or a bounty hunter or someone. Of course you're going to be earning credits. So you're going to represent them with tokens as well. There are 40 tokens for 1,000 credits. You have 16 tokens for 5,000. And then only 4 tokens representing 10,000. One interesting thing about the game is that when you try to go buy something new, you can actually get rid of some stuff you already have to reduce the cost of whatever it is you're trying to buy by the value of what you're giving up. It's not just your ship. Bartering is built into the financial system of the game. Remember, though, the goal is not to earn the most credits. The goal is to earn the most fame. All right, now we can start talking about cards. And all the cards in this game, much like what they've done with X-Wing 2nd Edition, are regular-sized cards. None of the mini cards in this one. Every player, as part of their setup, is going to get essentially a rules reference card about the player's turn. You're going to have a planning step where you essentially have three main options. Move your ship up to its hyperspace value, gain 2,000 credits from doing like odd jobs just during that step, like hurting nerfs or something, or recover all damage to both you and your ship, which is required if you were defeated previously and you're still having your little, standee laying down as if you're dead. You can also use any actions that have planning as the word in front of it. That's the case for any of these steps. You have the action step where you can perform any or all, but only once each, of delivering cargo and bounties, which can be done in bulk. A market action, which is basically purchasing something from the market. If on a planet, you can discard the top card of any market deck before you buy if you want. You can also then buy a top card of a market deck and resolve a patrol movement from it, as we will see. Doesn't have to be the same market deck that you may have discarded a card from the top of. Maybe you're just trying to get something away from another player. And you can trade cards with players who are in your space. Understand, though, trading anything like that, including credits, is something where none of the promises are binding, so beware, fellow players. They could betray you. And you have an encounter step where you choose one of either fighting a patrol, which is required if you have a negative reputation with a patrol in the same space, as I was mentioning before, resolve an encounter card, or resolve a contact token. Just either dealing with the contact token, as we'll see, or an encounter card, as we will also see. So they get those. The cards also fill you in on ways to gain fame. Complete personal goals or ship goals, which is only once per, unless you happen to switch ships, which you will actually do. Bounties, jobs, delivering illegal cargo, but that can bite you in the butt. When combat against patrols of levels 2 or 3, so the two middle ones, so not the first one that's already out to begin with, but at the same time also not the one that's going to wipe you out in one shot. And buy cards from the so-called luxury market deck. Then for a skills test, it's going to let you know that you will roll 2 dice. You pass if you roll at least one of the required results. The results required is based on whether you have the skill being tested. Again, unskilled, you need a crit because you don't have the skill. Skilled, you have the skill once, a crit or a hit. Highly skilled, a crit, a hit, or a focus because you have the skill more than once. We then have the so-called data bank cards. Okay. Now, it looks like there should be 92 of them. There's actually not. Instead, there are 53. Some of which have the same number, but a number of pips underneath to tell you how many of that number exist. These don't get shuffled. They get kept in order as a deck, and what will happen is different things will cause you to pull a specific databank card. If it's a number that has multiple pips, you randomly draw one of the ones with that number. If it's just one that only has one, then of course that's the only one you draw. And they don't go all the way up to 92. Obviously, there's only 53 cards. They've sort of parceled them out so that hopefully maybe this means someday there'll be some type of expansion to the game, maybe kind of like Rebellion, but we'll see, because it is a fun game. Now, there's several different types of these, depending on what you pull, but for instance, you may have some that tell you to do certain things based on a roll of a die. Others may give you a series of things to do representing some event that's happening for you. Some might help get you cargo, or give you a bounty that you can go hunt, basically by finding that particular contact on a particular planet and fighting them and taking them into custody. And yes, there are ways to do that, even if that person has become a part of your crew or someone else's crew, which is interesting. What's really cool about it, if it's someone else's crew, basically you either fight the attack value, which is this, right, of that individual, or the attack value of the character or ship for the other guy, the other player, depending on whether the other player decides to try to protect his crew member from you, which is kind of cool. I like that mechanic there. You can have a job to do, a destination, a place to go, a thing to do, and so on and so on. With rewards, you could have an instance which could add someone to your crew, and again, a new crew member will typically bring you new skills to help you with those skill checks. Or it could just be you run into a dangerous individual in the galaxy far, far away. Lots of different options. Remember, though, a lot of those will come from encountering a contact during the encounter phase. So you'll have the number to tell you which of those databank cards to draw. You can also just choose to encounter your space. Basically, you're encountering the location you're in to have some event happen. For that, you need encounter cards. The encounter cards are set up as such. Okay? You have 6 different puzzle piece type map tiles. Each of those has its own set of 10 encounter cards, along with nav points getting a set of 10, just in case you're not on a planet. They will typically tell you, with whatever that planet or location is, in this case the Maelstrom or Kessel for the one right here, okay, it'll tell you what you're likely to wind up running into there. An additional turn, or illegal cargo, or fame for an increase in reputation, and so on, right? So we have a set for Kessel and the Maelstrom. Heading to the right or clockwise from there for Tatooine and Nal Hutta, Ryloth and Naboo, the Ring of Kafrene and Takodana. Or if we head the opposite direction, counterclockwise out of the Kessel spot, we then have Mon Calamari and Lothal. And we have Cantonica and Ord Mantell. Again, all with 10 each, plus a deck for nav points. These will also tend to vary in style, but they'll have a section for each potential location, and sometimes there's conditionals involved. If you have positive hut reputation, or if you have negative or neutral hut reputation, you do whichever one fits your situation, or if you're on Nal Hutta, you do this entirely separate part. Some of them include things like bounties. Some of them will also include secrets that are something that you get and you keep to yourself until you can do something with it later. The secrets are not only clearly marked in this gray background, they're upside down compared to the rest of the card, so it's almost impossible to miss them. Some might give you something to earn some cargo, which you could then flip over and use, or give you a job, or perhaps a crew member, perhaps a secret mod, and so on. Now, before we get to the market decks, I do want to point out one last set of cards, which are the only ones left outside of the market deck we haven't looked at, and that's these. These are the AI cards. If you are playing a single-player game, these are how you'll know what the AI player is doing in each step. They play basically like a regular player, but there are certain modifications to it, including going through these. And it might say do the first that applies, or do all that apply, depending on the circumstance. Okay? And they play a little bit different with things like patrols and combat and whatnot, but it's actually relatively straightforward and doesn't dilute the game all that much if you're trying to play single player. So if you are someone who likes to play solo games and you've been wanting to find a Star Wars game that is sort of a solo game, not just in thematically being kind of like Solo a Star Wars story, but actually being a one-player game, this actually is a good one to try. For the record, there are 10 of these. All right, now let's talk about the market decks. There are a total of 6 different market decks. They tend to have different sizes in terms of the number of cards available in them, but they're all things that you can spend credits on. And basically, they'll be laid out kind of down this away beneath the board, or perhaps where my character board and ship card are right here. They're all going to have their top card face up, so you always know what you may be purchasing, but it's only what's on the top. But again, when you do a market action, before you do anything else, even if you don't buy anything, you can choose to discard the top card to the bottom of the deck and flip over a new card. If you're just discarding, you ignore any commands about what happens with patrols. As soon as you buy something, you take the one off the top, you flip over the one on top into its place, and that's when you pay attention to whatever it says about patrols, as we will see here. So the biggest deck is the Gear and Mod deck with 15 cards. That's gear and mods that help improve your combat values, your health, your hull, your hyperdrive, stuff like that. The various values within the game. Get your card back there. There's things like a DL-44 Heavy Blaster, which gives you better ground combat, or a vibro knife, or mods like a targeting computer, and so on. But notice here, it shows you the type, it tells you its gear, gives you a name, tells you what it does, tells you the cost. This tells you that patrols, again, there's only one patrol of each type out at any given time. Whatever patrols are showing up here, move this many spaces towards you. And you control the path that they take unless one of those paths would actually get them to you, in which case, yeah, you got to get them to you. And if you have a negative reputation with them, you're forced to encounter them in the encounter step as I mentioned earlier when we looked at those reference cards. So 15 possible pieces of gear or mods in the gear and mod deck, appropriately enough. Then you have a deck of jobs, 14 cards here, and most of them are regular jobs. Again, type and patrol movement, just regular jobs. There are 2, though, that are actually crew. You basically bring someone aboard as hired help. So you could say that 12 of the cards are about you getting a job, and 2 of the cards are about you hiring someone for a job. You then have 2 decks that tie at 11 cards each. This is the luxury deck. Typically, these are things that are going to allow you to get more fame, but they tend to be pretty dang expensive, as you can see there. But some of them will be cargo, some will be crew, gear. It just kind of depends on the circumstances. It'll be different types, but they're always going to have something to do with gaining fame. You also have 11 bounty market cards. Now, most of these are actual bounties on individual contacts, except you'll run into a couple that are jobs for a particular type of combat. Those are both essentially identical except for the movement of the patrols. Then you have a cargo deck. Typically, it'll be delivering something somewhere or picking it up from one place and then delivering it somewhere, depending on what the card tells you to do. There are a total of 10 of these, and they're pretty much all cargo with the exception of one, which is a smuggling compartment mod that lets you deal with illegal cargo. Basically, turn a blank result into a hit on a skill check. Then you have the ship deck for ships that you can buy. Now, there's 9 cards in here. You may say, well, wait. Hang on. There's 12 ship cards in the game because 4 players need to have those double-sided ones for either the Twilight-looking thing or the Mist Hunter-looking thing where you could play with your starting ship. And then we've named off 8 other ships that you can have the regular generic version of or fill the ship goal to get the named version of. So we're not going to be buying starter ships. Those are out of there. But that leaves only 8 ships that you could buy. So how are there 9 different ships perhaps in here? Well, basically what you got are cards that are going to tell you about each ship. It's going to give you the hyperspace value, the space combat value, the hull value, the cargo ore mod, and crew slots. Give you a price. Again, you're trading in your old ship towards this price, so it's not actually going to be that face value except for your first purchase of a ship beyond your starter. And there's one for each, as you would expect. But then there's a special one that lets you buy any ship sheet from the supply that costs more than your current ship. Place it on its ship goal side as normal, but then it suffers 3 damage. If it's not been removed from the game, search the market deck for the ship's card and remove it from the game. Then shuffle this card back into this deck. Okay, so used ship for sale. Special mechanic there within the ship market deck. So all the decks tend to be themed in a particular way, but there are some surprises in there for things that are just a little bit different. Beyond that, aside from a little advertising booklet, that's everything for Star Wars Outer Rim. So there you have it, folks. A quick look at the contents in Star Wars Outer Rim and a little bit of a sense of how much of it plays. I have to say, this is definitely my favorite Star Wars game from Fantasy Flight in a long time. It's relatively quick to set up, it's self-contained, it feels somewhat personal as you're playing as these characters, and it doesn't require a huge amount of planning ahead of time. Not just the setup itself, but it's not like you have decks to prepare, squads to prepare, squadrons to prepare, or anything like that. You just jump in and play. Now, it might stand to have a little bit more character interaction or player interaction, but I think it depends on the way that you play, how isolated each character is going to be. It depends on if you wind up on the same planets as others, if you wind up actually trading and cooperating with others, that sort of thing, and to what degree perhaps people are getting crew members that wind up getting bounties on them later. So the amount of direct player-to-player interaction will tend to vary between games, but it's a solid amount. I wouldn't say that it's one of the more player-to-player interactive games. It's much more competitive player-to-player than it is direct interaction player-to-player in many cases. But definitely one that I really am enjoying. And yeah, I think that if they do eventually come out with some kind of expansion to this, I'll snatch it up and I'll definitely be jumping back into it, rather than like with Rebellion, where I think I've only played the expansion maybe once or twice because it's just not quite my style of game. So if you like games like Gloom of Kilforth or Nemesis, any of these games that send you into a situation as an individual, have you doing things that are personal to you, that have a lot of available options to go with to get to your goal, and you love the Star Wars feel, then Outer Rim may be for you. If you play Edge of the Empire, yeah, this is pretty much right up your alley. So hopefully this has been useful to you. You can find this at retail now for about $65. You can find it online for about $50 to $55 depending on where you look. And hopefully at some point soon we'll get the freaking game mat finally for the game. Though the game mat does give you a place to put the cards and to put the map. It doesn't actually have a version of the map actually on the mat itself because again, in order to change up the difficulty and some of the game balance, you can switch around the map tiles. Thanks for watching. Hope you dig Outer Rim.